Health and Welfare Committee to order. First up on our agenda, we have a confirmation hearing for David Dillon. He is the public member nominee for KU Hospital Authority, and he is a reappointment. And if I remember correctly, he is not here, or he is here. He was not coming, right? No. Okay. Committee members, this is a reappointment. He did, if I remember right, he did send me an email just to explain, and I think he might have sent one to all of the committee members. You have his packet before you. Has everybody had an opportunity to review his packet? Okay. Are there any questions on anything in his packet? Oh, is he? Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, well, Kevin, welcome to the committee. I apologize, I did not catch you that you were here. Would you like to say a few words? Or? Dave. Let me get the right person. Dylan.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to. I didn't plan to. I just was joining to see in case there were any questions. Your assistant was kind enough to give me the link. The KU Hospital's been an important part of the health community for the state of Kansas, and I'm proud to be associated with them and would be pleased if you were so inclined to reappoint me.
Dave, we appreciate that. I did get your name right that time. I apologize. I was looking at two different notes that I had.
Not a problem.
Kevin is on the 11th, so I apologize, everybody. I'm getting ahead of ourselves. Committee, do you have any questions for David? Senator Steffen.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Dillon. How are you today?
Good morning, Senator. Good to see you.
Good. Appreciated your call the other day. Mr. Dillon grew up in Hutchinson and is well known in the area and obviously very well thought of. And he was kind enough to call a couple of days ago. We had a nice conversation. I would like to take this opportunity to reiterate a couple of the issues because they kind of even move more into the forefront yesterday. You know, as I talked to you about out at Great Bend, where I helped build Great Bend Regional Hospital years ago, and we sold it to KU Health Systems, we've really seen them come in and run this thing like a state agency, and there's just very, very tight bureaucratic control and regulations, and it makes the good practice of medicine very difficult. And I'm hoping that we'll get some input onto the board and start to see that change a little bit. Also, what's come up through this pandemic, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on, we've really seen that focus of thought narrow down and truly come out of just academic medicine. And there was a bill introduced in the House yesterday. That's kind of why I bring it up again, that tries to allude to something in regards to that. It's incredibly poorly written and incredibly unhelpful. I'm introducing a bill today that's a lot simpler and a lot clearer that tries to give patients more autonomy in having the opportunity to be prescribed FDA-approved medications. Because what we've seen through this response to a virus is winners and losers being picked among the pharmaceutical industries and the patients ending up being losers. So I hope with your second term on the board, you'll be able to kind of keep us out in the rural area in mind, keep this broader viewpoint of medicine and how it's called the practice of medicine for a reason. And right now there's a very clear attempt to turn it into the algorithmic practice of medicine. And that's not in the best interest of the patient ultimately. We are seeing physicians and a lot of providers across the board becoming hospital employees, and that too is taking a checks and balances out of the system. It's making it more of a one world order type of situation. So I hope you'll help keep an eye on those sorts of things, and we appreciate your willingness to serve.
Senator, thank you. I am not familiar with the bill introduced yesterday or yours, so I don't have any comment on that. But having come from Hutchinson, I am all about the patients, and I'm all about the rural parts of Kansas. So you can certainly count on me looking after those interests.
Committee, do we have any further questions for Dave? Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to thank you for your service on the Hospital Authority. I know it's it's time consuming, and but it's certainly beneficial to all of Kansans. So thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, I do not see any more questions. Do we have a motion on the nomination? Senator Gossage. What's your motion? I'm sorry, we have 3 options on this.
I move that we pass out of the committee favorably for the nomination of Mr. Dillon.
Okay, we have a motion by Senator Gossage and a second by Senator Stephan to pass out Dave Dillon favorably for the Senate full confirmation. Do we have any discussion on this before we take it to a vote? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed? No? Ayes have it. Dave, looks like you're going to the full Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Committee members, we will now turn our attention to the next order of business. And the next order of business is the hearing for Senate Bill 77. So we will now call the hearing to Senate Bill 77 open. First up for our proponents, we have Senator Baumgardner. And Senator, thank you so much for being able to join us through WebEx. Apologize, I know the roads were really bad for you. We're just glad we have this technology that you can offer your testimony. So Senator, go ahead.
Well, I appreciate it. Are you able to hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay. Did you want a bill introduction first from Jenna or explanation? I'm willing to wait.
Yes, Senator, I'm sorry. I'm just kind of getting ahead of myself. So Jenna, if you wouldn't mind giving that bill explanation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, Senate Bill 77 enacts the Audiology and Speech Compact Pathology and Speech Language, Pathology Interstate Compact. Section 1 defines the purpose of the bill, which is generally to facilitate interstate audiology and speech language pathology in order to improve the public's access to these services. And I have to stop my printer just a second. I don't know. Stop. Okay, I don't know what happened there. Sorry. Section 2 defines the relevant terms. Section 3 explains the requirements that states have to meet in order to join the compact. And then to provide the services allowed by this compact, an audiologist or speech language pathologist must hold a home state license in one of those compact states. Subsection B requires a FBI fingerprint-based background check for the individuals who want to provide services under this compact, and E and F set out the specific licensure requirements that the states have to meet. Section 4 of this bill describes the requirements for gaining a privilege to practice, which includes only having one home state license at a time, a privilege to practice renewable upon renewal of your home state license, and the audiologist or speech language pathologist has to function within the laws and regulations of their remote state. And then if your home state license is encumbered, so if there's any issues with your home state license, you would lose your compact privileges in all of the other states that are a part of the compact until your license is no longer encumbered and 2 years have passed. Section 5 provides that member states would recognize the right of an audiologist or speech language pathologist to practice via telehealth. Section 6 is a section for military active duty personnel, and it would allow those active service members and their spouses to designate a home state where they have a current license in good standing and retain that home state designation during the period of service when they're on active duty. Section 7 explains how the compact, the home, and remote states will conduct and report adverse actions, as well as the consequences for one of those professionals who receives one of those adverse actions, such as the suspension of your license. Section 8 establishes a joint public agency known as the Audiology and Speech Language Pathology Compact Commission, and provisions related to the commission's membership, voting, as well as their meetings. Section 9, which begins on page 14, requires licensee sharing of the information for all the compact states. And the compact states would submit their data to this coordinated database to this database so that the information could be shared with all of the compact states, and it would allow for expedited sharing of adverse information. So if one of these professionals were to get an adverse action against them, that the other states could find out quickly in order to take action against the audiologist or speech language pathologist. And the coordinated database information would be expunged by the law of the reporting compact state. So if you were to have an offense in Kansas and have that expunged, then that would carry over to those other states. You wouldn't use another state's compact or expungement laws. Section 10 describes the process for creating rules that would govern compact operations. Section 11 details the oversight, dispute resolution, and enforcement of the compact. And section 12 begins on page 17, and it lays out that the compact would become effective when the 10th state enacts the compact into law. Section 13 is a rule of construction that would allow for a liberal construction of the compact's terms. And there's also a severability clause in there. And section 14 states that nothing in the compact would prevent enforcement of any other law of a member state that is inconsistent with the act. And that completes my bill brief. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but I'm guessing that we have some really good proponents who can probably go into specific details about these practices.
Thank you for that bill explanation. Members, do we have any questions for Jenna on the bill? Okay, seeing none, we will now move to proponents. First up, Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you so much, and good morning. I'm not going to read what I have in my proponent testimony, but I am going to highlight a few things that I didn't include in the testimony. First of all, I think it's important for us to know that 6 states have already passed the compact language in their state. Oklahoma is one of them, so a neighboring state. And just 2 weeks ago, the Nebraska Senate had a hearing. I did provide testimony for that hearing because, of course, we are wanting, I feel, to better serve our state, we are wanting as many neighboring states to be a part of this compact as well. Most people don't realize, but that whole process to earn a doctorate of audiology or to become licensed and certified to be a speech language pathologist, that process is very arduous, but also the cohort of each of those programs is quite small. If you are a Kansas resident and you want to go to a school of audiology, there's just one in our state, and that cohort is usually the size of about 6 to 10 students. That's the same for other neighboring states as well. The speech language pathologists, again, that is a small cohort. It's larger than audiology, but it's because of that clinical requirement. I feel that by participating in this compact, by passing this into law, it's an opportunity for Kansas to very much be at that table, that oversight table for this compact. Now, the important thing to remember is our speech language pathologists, or SLPs, and our audiologists serve Kansans of all ages. That starts from a newborn hearing screening, which is mandated by law, to speech therapy of an elderly or even swallowing training for someone that is a stroke patient. Their services are crucial in our schools That's why last year, because our Public Health Committee was so busy with the business at hand during last legislative session, we actually had the hearing for this compact in the Senate Education Committee, and it did pass out of committee, but it got waylaid because of COVID. These services are crucial for our schools, for our hospitals, our nursing homes, and our rehab centers. And one of the important components of this compact is the way in which it addresses telemedicine therapy. That is so crucial. We've realized with COVID to have those services to continue to be available. That includes therapy sessions for nonverbal autistic kids, and hearing aid adjustments that can be done via the computer. So for us to be able to maintain uninterrupted services, but also to provide in our rural populations that may not have an audiologist or a speech pathologist in that area, that could be provided via telemedicine from a neighboring state. And I feel that all of us benefit from this professional healthcare compact. And quite frankly, I know it's a lengthy bill, but the language in the bill is almost identical to the compacts that we formed in our state for physicians, for nurses, for EMTs. And I would just like to add that the component with regard for those that serve in the military, be it the military officer or the family member, with us having several military bases in our state, that transferability is very important. Also, always assuring that we can track those that behave inappropriately. So the fact that if someone were to have disciplinary action or actually lose their license, that we as a member of the compact would immediately have that in a shared database is so crucial, because we don't want a bad actor to be able to move and set up practice in another state without that being tracked. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will stop and I'll stay on for any questions that might be asked later.
Senator, and we will hold questions committee until after all the proponents have had an opportunity to speak. Next up, we have Susie Turnus. She's the Executive Director for the Kansas Speech Language Hearing Association. Susie, welcome to the committee.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much, Chair and members of the committee. I am Susie Turnus. I am the Executive Director of the Kansas Speech Language Hearing Association, which we call KSHA for short. That's a long name, so KSHA is much easier. I'm also a practicing audiologist here in Wichita at Ascension Via Christi. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address SB 77 regarding the Interstate Compact. Our organization has about 1,000 SLPs and audiologists from across the state, and we certainly support SB 77. Senator Baumgardner already noted many of the things, so I won't go into a whole lot of additional detail except to mention a few things. As she said, the state has already enacted 3 such professional compacts, including one for physicians, nurses, and for EMTs. So this is not new to Kansas. This is nothing extraordinary or out of the ordinary. This compact would operate very similarly to those compacts that we already have. Adding Kansas to this list of compact states would allow both practitioners benefits and, of course, recipients of speech, language, and hearing services. Once you're licensed in your home state, then you would apply for a privilege to practice in other states where you might have clients, especially for those SLPs and audiologists who provide telehealth or telemedicine, or in our field we call it teletherapy. You would apply for a privilege to practice in each of the states where you have clients. Benefits to the public include improving continuity of care. So when you have either an SLP who moves, or for example, a child who moves from state to state, maybe a military child, improving that continuity of care so an SLP can continue to provide services to that student or to that child. And of course, improving portability for military spouses. I know one of the other testimonies that you have is a written testimony from one of our members who is, she's still they're still married, but her husband was in the military, and she details how difficult it was every time that they moved from place to place, trying to get licensed in a new state. And ultimately that contributed to them having to drop out of the military because it was just too difficult. I want to just tell you that when I wrote my testimony, there were 20 states that had either passed the legislation so far or had introduced it this year, and that's been updated already to 23 states. In fact, as we speak at this very moment, similar hearings are taking place in Alabama and New Hampshire. So it's moving quickly. It's anticipated that this will go into effect because 10 states have to pass it before it goes into effect. So that's probably going to happen this year. We want Kansas to be among the first because that gives us a place at the table for writing the rules and regulations once the commission is formed. Just a little bit more about how the overall commission works. Each state's licensing board, so for us it's KDADS, will appoint one SLP and one audiologist to that commission. And so that helps to operate this thing. I think what else I want to tell you. I did want to clarify one other thing that I want to make sure is clear. Nothing about this compact expands our scope of practice. If that is a concern for some, it should not be. You are bound by the scope of practice in the remote state. So, for example, here in the state of Kansas, as an audiologist, I have to both have an audiology license and a separate license to dispense hearing aids, for example. So if another audiologist in another state were to have a privilege to practice in Kansas, they would also have to have a Kansas dispensing license because that's the rule of the remote state. So there's nothing about this that expands scope of practice. You're still held to the rules and regulations of the state in which you are practicing, as well as your home state. So with that, I thank you for this opportunity, and I will stand for questions if anyone has any.
Susie, thank you for your testimony, and we will hold until the final proponent testimony. Next up, committee, we have Chris Peterson. She's the speech language pathologist, clinical associate for professor for the University of Kansas.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for this opportunity to show my support for the Interstate Compact. And I'm going to just elaborate a little bit on some of the points that that Susie mentioned. But I am a SLP and clinical associate professor at the University of Kansas. So I am training students to go out and be professionals. And I've also coordinated an infant toddler program. So I've worked at serving young children in rural communities in Kansas. So I understand the struggles that the rural communities face in attracting and retaining providers. This compact is a tremendous opportunity for us to ensure that all Kansans have access to services across the lifespan. You know, whether it's a young child with autism or Down syndrome or hearing loss or an adult that has a stroke or traumatic brain injury, we need to ensure that all individuals are receiving high quality service. And our field is currently facing shortages. We have been facing shortages for a long time. You know, you have the stats in my testimony about there being a 25% need of providers, 27% in healthcare facilities, and in schools it's even higher. You know, 42% of our providers are working, you know, serving kids well over the average caseload. So we have shortages of providers. We're stretching our providers as much as we can to serve kids because we can't turn them away if we're serving them under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So we're hard to find, we're hard to retain. So the demand is certainly high, and unfortunately that's felt significantly in our rural communities. We often have to make some really hard decisions about services since we can't turn children away, especially providers are being taxed and they're burning out. they're leaving the state or they're spending more time doing paperwork or driving to see kids. So we're also affecting the quality of services when we can't practice at the top of our license. So this compact would allow us, as Susie mentioned, to access providers across state lines to ensure that we're providing the care that everyone needs. It will allow us to tap into providers that have areas of expertise that not all SLPs or audiologists have. Our field is very broad, and so not everybody has the training or the expertise in areas like stuttering or central auditory processing disorder. And if we can tap into providers across state lines that have that expertise, we can ensure that Kansans are getting the high quality services that they need. And as mentioned before, it provides that continuity of care as people move, whether it's our citizens or whether it's providers are moving across state lines. They can continue to serve individuals, which then again keeps people and dollars in Kansas, which is important. So there are many benefits to this compact. It's going to increase access to all Kansans. It's going to allow us to provide that continuity of care. It's going to ensure that we're providing a high quality of care because we're going to get the providers that have the expertise that's needed and free up providers to spend time focusing on quality and not just making sure that they're trying to get to individuals. So I thank you for considering this important legislation that's going to improve our practice and do so in a way that will reduce any administrative burdens. It will reduce geographic burdens. So I thank you for considering this, and I will also stand for questions.
Chris and committee, at this time, we will open it up for questions. And I do have one before we move on to other questions. And I'm not sure who would best answer this. And it might not be so much of a question, but more of a statement with a little bit of a question at the end. I know when the nurse compact was being worked, I heard from a lot of nurses in my area. I live in southeast Kansas. I border Missouri and Oklahoma, that the cost, if they lived in Kansas because they were not part of the compact, but Missouri and Oklahoma and Arkansas were, it was cheaper for them to move 5 miles or 15 miles across the state line, have their home license in Missouri or Oklahoma or Arkansas, have the compact, and then have, instead of being licensed in Kansas as your home state, then you have to go get 3 more licenses because of the compact. Would that be a similar situation for this compact? And the reason why I think that's very important to know is because a lot of nurses I know had moved before that compact. They just got frustrated with the high expense and did move across state lines for that very reason. So I'm just curious if that would have the same impact.
This is Susie. So I guess I'm not aware of what the fees are, what the licensure fees are in our bordering states. So I'm not sure if that would apply or not. I can certainly look into that and get back to you. How I believe it is envisioned to work is that you would pay for your home license. And so here in Kansas, it's $120 every 2 years, I believe. And then you would pay, for every state that you want a privilege to practice in, you would pay a fee to that state as well. It would be less than what obtaining a license in each state would be, but you would pay for privilege to practice in that state so that that state can contribute to their licensing board budget. I can find out the details about what the bordering states' rates are.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Senator Gossage.
Thank you all, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I reached out in anticipation of this hearing to some of my friends that are speech language pathologists as well as audiologists and talked to several of them who are all in favor of this. One had emailed me and basically said I would support it. I hold licenses for both Kansas and Missouri. as all of us hold certification from the National Professional Organization, which requires not only the master's degree for SLPs or Doctor of Audiology for audiologists, but we also have to pass national testing and completion of a clinical fellowship year before we receive our full certification. So getting certification is already quite rigorous. And consider that there has been a shortage of both SLPs and audiologists in Kansas for a while. So I would definitely be supporting this bill. My question is, living where I live in Johnson County, the first thing people would want to know is, what about Missouri? Missouri has not been mentioned. Do you know if that bill is one of the 23 states that's being seen? And before you answer, I just want to mention that as a health insurance agent, I'm licensed in multiple states because we do have reciprocity and compacts there. And that does make it quite easy if you're in good standing in your state. So Susie, I see you nodding. Would you be willing to answer that question?
Absolutely. So Missouri is a special case. Because Missouri does not have the same exact requirements for licensure, they are not eligible to be part of the compact at this time. Basically, for SLPs, most states require what we call a CFY, which is a clinical fellowship year. It's a whole year of practicum. In Missouri, they don't require that. So because their licensure requirements are so different from most other states, they can't be part of the compact because the licensure requirements aren't the same. So what we need to do is give Missouri a kick in the pants to get their licensure up to snuff with standardized across the United States, and then they can be part of the compact. But that's a great point, because we do have lots of people who live either in Johnson County or on the Missouri side who practice on both sides of the border. So certainly we hope that is the case, that Missouri is working on that. And I know their state organization wants to do that, but as you know, it's difficult to open up statute and that sort of thing.
But one could apply as my friend did here, regardless of the compact, for the state of Missouri. Thank you.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. As a practicing physician for the last 32 years, I have a multitude of questions regarding this, ranging from, and I'm just going to go through them rather than let you answer them one at a time, because I think ultimately you all as a group are going to have to spend a little bit of time thinking about this. And unfortunately, I'm quite a bit older than you, and I've been through a lot of this. I've seen a lot of this, and I don't think you know where you're headed. But, if we have shortages, why aren't we expanding the program? Sounds like a very nice job and a lot of nice people doing the job. So it doesn't sound like we've really looked at expanding. What's the advantage going to regional rules and regulations? Again, that gets back to what I talked about a little bit earlier. You're going to narrow the focus within your specialty, and you will regret that down the road. I guarantee you. What evidence do we have that two-dimensional audiology is better than seeing people in person? I like to say I've practiced medicine for 32 years. I've seen people in person. I don't believe for 1 second any of us are better looking at somebody in 2 dimensions. And so this is an absolute commitment to that form of practice. And to me, that's an absolute commitment to mediocrity. What I see happening in the future here is you're going to regionalize control of your specialty, and you are going to have people control a whole lot of audiologists. You're going to shut down audiologists being in smaller communities. You're going to further separate the patient from the provider. And ultimately, what you're going to do is you're going to create, through those processes, you're going to create competition that's going to destroy your reimbursement. And you're going to really, at that point, put your specialty at risk when it's no longer monetarily desirable place to be in the workforce. So I think this is fraught with hazards. I think you're making an incredible commitment to telemedicine that it way too soon, and I don't think ultimately it's going to be good for the state of Kansas.
Senator Petty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is to Susie, and thank you all for being here today. And I've got to let you know that 100% of the emails that I've received from those in the profession have been supportive of this legislation. You mentioned, Susie, that need 10 states for it to go into effect. Is this correct that there are now 6?
Yes, there are 5 or 6. Last I saw, I have the compact map here. Wyoming, Nevada, Oklahoma, Louisiana, North Carolina, and Virginia. So 6 so far.
Okay, and you mentioned that there are 23 states that now have it somewhere in the pipeline of working towards legislation.
Correct. Including Colorado and Nebraska, our bordering states, have introduced it this session as well.
Okay, thank you. And so this is kind of an interesting follow-up to my former colleague's question, because it seems that telemedicine is an important tool to help for that. I worked in education for 36 years. I understand the shortage of speech pathologists within our educational system throughout the state, whether you're living in an urban area or whether you're living in a rural area, and their caseloads. So just give us an example, either you or Chris, about how that's been used by your profession to help provide that service.
Sure. I'm going to let Chris mostly answer this, but I did want to mention one thing in response to Senator Stephan about quality of care of in-person therapy versus remote therapy. There have been plenty of research studies now that have shown that in-person therapy is the same outcomes, just as high quality. And certainly that's for certain types of patients and clients with certain types of needs. In-person is best for lots of kids and lots of situations. So this is not meant to be a replacement. It's meant to be another tool in the toolbox when an in-person human being is not available due to distance or shortages. So I'm going to allow Chris to answer the question about how teletherapy is currently being used. She'll have some great examples.
And I also wanted to jump on that point, Susie, about when we introduced this last year for the pandemic, telemedicine wasn't a primary focus for this. We have lots of communities that are very close to borders that can access people in person. So a lot easier for somebody to drive 5 miles across the border to serve somebody in person than for somebody to link up an hour away via telepractice. So we see this not as a telemedicine bill. We see that as an important aspect of it, but a way for us to reach people in person a lot easier, so that we can do what we know works for each family, and especially in rural communities, that face-to-face can be very critical, and families can make that decision on whether to connect with somebody in person or whether they want to access somebody via telepractice. So to have that choice, I think it really allows us to make sure that we're providing the highest level of service that we can, and that we're incorporating family needs and preferences into that. And to speak to the question about how we're using telepractice, and while that has been a shift for many providers who did not receive that training, and now we're able to train our students and go out and do this, it has become an essential tool, because it is another way for us to access individuals and families and connect with them. I think specifically of the younger population where you wouldn't think that telepractice would be a good fit. A lot of our infant toddler programs have been able to connect with families more often in the rural areas especially. They have been able to do more parent education in supporting their child. So children have actually received more services and have made more progress quicker because of that access, one, that frequency, but also telepractice has kind of forced adults to connect and learn from each other, which is much different than if you are being face to face. So it has become a good tool for our infant toddler practitioners, as well as, I mean, you could see it across the lifespan, but I'm hearing that even though we all struggle with technology, that we feel that we're connecting more with people. There is a very focused purpose when we all sit down in front of the computer and we have a shared agenda for what we want to accomplish in a session. And we can focus more on that parent or caregiver education piece, or even teachers in schools that we could, if we're, for example, I see a child in his preschool and I can talk with his teacher and his aides, as well as providing the service. And I can also connect with his caregivers. And sometimes we're all together for part of the session. And so that prevents me from having to have multiple separate conversations when we're all on the same page. So there are some significant advantages that people are finding to using telepractice, to having that as a tool, not a replacement, but another tool in the bag that we can use. And knowing that, the rigorous training that we have to go to, we need to trust providers to make decisions that are in the best interest of the people that they're serving, and they make that decision together. It's not a one size fits all. And then to go back, I do want to touch on the question about why aren't we expanding programs because of shortages, and that's an issue in higher ed, that there is not enough funding, and I'm not advocating for anything else here, but I'm saying that across the country there are not enough programs that have enough faculty to provide the requirements, both academic and clinical training, to send out enough providers into the workforce. And so that would be great to have more providers, but that's something that we've struggled with for a long time, is getting people that can train them, so that we can increase the numbers of professionals in the field. So that's a whole nother issue, but I did want to address that is something that we've been concerned about for a long time, but I don't see any fixes to that right now. So our best bet is to try to access as many skilled providers as we can that are out there within our state, but also outside of our state. And so sorry for going on.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up, Chris, and I think most providers would agree with the fast learning curve for when it comes to using telemedicine, but I have heard that from other providers as well, particularly with early childhood, that the fact that they are providing the service through a telepractice, that has actually helped to increase the parent participation and the parents' understanding about how they can help their child. And we know, and when it comes to speech, that we can have such a big impact on children early, and how important that is. So thank you for the information.
Committee, not seeing any further questions. Proponents, we sure appreciate you taking the time out for your testimony today. Committee members, I would point to your attention that we do have written only testimony from Lynn Williams. She's the president of American Speech Language Hearing Association. Anna Mummy, Communications, and Veronica Ferrero, Board VP for Finance for the Kansas Speech Language Hearing Association. And Josh Seaver, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Do we have any other proponents for this testimony on Senate Bill 77? Okay, seeing none, we do not have any opponents listed. Is there anybody wanting to testify as an opponent? Not seeing any. We also do not have any neutral. Is there anybody wishing to testify as a neutral? Seeing none, committee, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 77. We do not have anything else on the agenda. There's only a couple minutes left, so we will not be taking any final action today. We will try to take some final action tomorrow, time permitting. Just as a final reminder, please leave your packets, confirmation packets here for Danola so she can pick those up. Is there anything else come before the committee?
Could you mention what bills you're thinking about taking final action?
120 and 77, and we still have number 12 that we still have to look at as well. So if you do have any amendments, please make sure you get with Jenna and get those in the hopper for us so we have those all ready. Is there anything else come before the committee? Seeing none, committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.